Well, the very first step that we find with many, many startups, and they think it's the greatest idea that's ever occurred and somebody's going to buy it immediately. Go out and talk to customers that you think are your customers. Present your idea, your product, and see what they tell you. You have to not be as risk adverse as you might think. There are going to be failures among the people that you work with and the companies you support. But that's the nature of investment in early stage ideas.
Paul Krutko, welcome to Visionary. Now, in these really difficult times for some people, we've got stagnating wages, we've got economies all over the place, we don't know what's coming down the pipe at us. Do you have to be crazy to think of starting a business?
No, I don't think so. Sometimes when the economy is in this particular position, particularly in the United States, that's when people say, oh, corporate life is not for me. I think maybe I should try to start a business.
And so how can leaders foster a culture that encourages people to start things up?
Well, I think what's really important, and in my experience, is that you create a platform that is a partnership between the private sector, the academic community, and local government. And you create that kind of working relationship so they can respond to changes in the economy as they happen.
Right, right. I wonder what it takes to turn a region as a whole into a thriving economy.
I think part of it is making sure you have a good understanding of your assets and building on those assets, and that your anchor institutions play a role in that. What I mean by that, in some communities, that might be a very significant health facility. It might be in others, in academic institutions, or it might be a corporation. But what happens where regions fail in that regard, a different way to answer your question, is they try to be something that they're not. I mean, there are many, many places around the world who have branded themselves as Silicon this or Silicon that. And having worked in the Valley for 10 years, it was a unique set of circumstances there. So if you try to be that, you may miss your opportunities that are really based on what your own strengths are.
Right, so you've got to find your USP.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So how can fostering innovation help the broader economy?
Well, my view, and in terms of the work that I'm doing now, we kind of use the phrase gardening. And what we mean by that is you are working to grow companies, startups, scale-ups that are present in your community and grow them to scale at home. That's the best way, I think, for an economy to evolve. Many communities try to attract a major investment. And when they do that, they often put all their eggs in one basket. If you support a number of companies to help them try to grow, you have, when using an American phrase, you have more times at bat. Maybe that's a cricket phrase as well. But the point being, more small companies can give you a better economic future than having all your eggs in a basket of one large company.
Mm-hmm. And when you talk about investment, which is better for the kind of growth you describe, public or private?
I think it's a combination of both. We, in my program that I run in the United States, we invest in companies before venture. But when we invest, we demand at least a one-to-one match from private sector resources. So when we invest in an early stage company, we need to see that there's at least someone, angels, other private investors, who are willing to bet on that company while we're willing to bet on that company as well.
Tell me a little bit about the group that you run.
So Ann Arbor Spark was founded in 2005 by the University of Michigan's president. Many people here in the UK may not know that the University of Michigan is the largest research university in the United States, budget-wise, $2 billion a year, preeminent across a number of fields. But what was occurring was the president came in and said, why doesn't our regional economy look like California or Massachusetts? And so they intentionally created my organization called Ann Arbor Spark, which is, in European parlance, is a triple helix organization. And what that means is it's got the private sector, the public sector, and the academic sector all around a board. We're a nonprofit. We've been, as I said, in existence for 21 years. We do extensive work scaling up startups that come out of the University of Michigan. To put a fine point on that, last year that university had 673 invention disclosures. That means that there are ideas coming out that are patentable for products in life science, in medical devices, in IT, etc. So the notion was the university is producing these ideas. They're actually licensing these technologies. How do we make sure that the jobs and investment that result from those growing companies happen in and around the community where the university was? So that was the intent, and we've been doing that now for 21 years.
And what's the answer? How do you do that?
Well, one thing that we believe very strongly in is that it's the programs that you're delivering rather than the facility that you create. Many communities focus on, we're going to build an accelerator, we're going to invest in a building. And what they then do is not provide the follow-on funding or support for the actual work that gets done in the building. So different from here at Here East, which we're very proud to be a partner of in an international collaboration, we don't own real estate. What we do is we support early stage companies in private real estate by delivering the programs to them. So our resources are spent on staff and on direct grant support for those companies in a non-dilutive way to help them grow. For example, if you came to us and said, I have this great idea, but I can't afford a patent lawyer, we will give you a grant to help you get a patent lawyer to protect your IP. Now, we're not housing you someplace. You are responsible for doing that.
It's very much focused on the local community.
It is. We've had responsibilities where if you in detail of us as an organization, we are sometimes run programs for the entire state of Michigan out of our office. In our investment work, and we have a capital pool, we've invested $31.5 million in early stage companies, probably about 150 or so over the last 16 years. They don't necessarily have to be domiciled in Ann Arbor. They can be anywhere in the state of Michigan. Now, they can't be in the UK or they can't be in California, but we have had that remit to do investment throughout the state of Michigan.
Now, in your book, Deluxe, How Luxury Lost Its Luster, that came out about 2 decades ago. Could you just give us the premise for that book?
Well, it took me a while to figure it out, but the idea is that the luxury industry sacrificed its integrity for the sake of profit. That's the argument of the book. And that basically I argue in the book that it's impossible to be producing true luxury if you are a publicly traded company, because these two ideas are in conflict. That to be a publicly traded company, you first answer to your shareholders. And if you're producing luxury, you should be answering to your customer.
Mm-hmm. So that was around 20 years ago.
Yeah, it
How
came out in
have you
2007.
What's the arc of the luxury market been since then? I mean, are you basically seeing it come full circle, so it's back to that point?
No, not at all. It's gotten even more bigger and more less integrity and really caring less about the customer, except, selling them a lot of stuff. But yes, some brands have gone more into things like high jewelry, or they're really focusing on couture and making things for the 0.001% to really cater to the Bezos of the world who have who don't look at price tags. But again, the whole point of it is to just make money. That was the difference, is that in the age of globalization and corporatization of the luxury fashion business, the luxury fashion business shifted its raison d'etre from making beautiful products to making beautiful profits. That the people who own the companies now really only care about making money, and that the product is just one of the ways they do it, as opposed to making beautiful products and the profits are what you get because you made a beautiful product.
The FT profiled former luxury shoppers who say that they're walking away from the market. They find it gross and boring. And that's down to just what you say. They're no longer concentrating on small, beautiful things.
No, that the customer isn't as dumb as the marketing people think they are. That's the worst part today about the luxury fashion business that really just I find infuriating. It's and I'm not the only one who finds infuriating. Clearly, the customer does too, and that's why they're walking away. Uh, I heard an amazing story from an insider from the Louis Vuitton menswear atelier studio working with Virgil Abloh. He was working with Virgil Abloh, the person who told me the story. And Virgil said, so let's see if we can make the dumbest, most ridiculous thing that's absolutely useless. We can't, there's no use for it, and slap a Louis Vuitton logo on it and see if it sells. And so they came up with this idea of making a gold medal pineapple. There's no use for it. It's not like you could take the lid off and put things in it. It's just a pineapple. And they put LVs all over it. Sold out, sold like crazy. And like the most insane part of it is when I went to visit the little museum that they have up in Agnières, the original Louis Vuitton house, that pineapple with the L's in it is in the museum as part of the exhibition. I was like, okay, now you're mocking even like the people who come look at your museum. And once that sold, then they just said, let's keep doing this. Let's just keep making crazy, ugly stuff that has no purpose or is really insulting or makes you look like an idiot if you carry it, and see if they buy it. And once I knew this story, I went back and looked at the collections, and you could see it. Like there's a fruit crate done like a Louis Vuitton basket. So you're like schlepping your fruit crate back from the market. Or there was a box with monkeys coming out of it eating bananas. I mean, just like the most insane things. And you go, what is that? Are they being clever? No, they're mocking you. And and that's what they do. They mock their customers. They think they're idiots, and the customers are getting wise. They're saying, you know what, this stuff, like I have, something from one of these companies from 10 years ago. It's better made than the one I have now. They're not as dumb as the executives like them to believe they are. They kind of took advantage of this and really got this sort of jaded approach to customers during the era where they were really chasing after the Chinese customer, because of course the Chinese customer had no old Louis Vuitton trunks in the closet and up in the attic. They had no references because they had been, under communist rule for almost a century, and they'd had the Cultural Revolution, and all this stuff had been banished, and they were all wearing Mao suits, and they didn't have the culture of luxury, though luxury was invented in China, million thousands of years ago. That's where it comes from. So if you think about it, how can you be a luxury firm and turn out $20 million worth of stuff every year? Not 12 million, 20 billion, $20 billion worth of stuff. That's the same numbers as Zara. Now, yes, Zara's selling it for 100 and you're selling it for 10,000. So it's not quite as much stuff, but it's still mass production. It's assembly line production. It's seeing it everywhere. It's ubiquitous. And I was already predicting in the book in 2007 that one of these days, this push on mass consumption of luxury was going to have its tipping point, and people were going to say, it's just like everything else. It's everywhere. There's nothing unusual or special about it. It's just the same stuff at a higher price. And that's what's happening.
Well, it's an authorial conceit, to tell the truth, because the theme of the book is humanity's endeavours to avert its own extinction. And generally that's kind of being done by our fellow humans, or some of them anyway. And so there's this very loose collection of people who I've tried to authorialise into a kind of coherent narrative. And so that's why I've called it that, because these people are a disparate league and they're trying to prevent catastrophe.
So what is a catastrophe?
Well, I'm glad you asked. A catastrophe, in the kind of loose definition that I use in the book, is something that could kill a great many of us, or all of us. And so researchers use the phrase catastrophic risk for something that could kill lots of us, and existential risk for something that could kill all of us. And with catastrophe, I try to bundle those things together. And that's what the book is about. And examples could be asteroids hitting the planet, or supervolcanoes erupting and causing a kind of volcanic winter from which we don't recover, or something terrible to do with AI, or a very bad pandemic. All of these things and more could be catastrophes.
So can we just delve into those a little bit more? Because I was reading what you were saying about it, and just you were giving the scale of these. So you were talking about the last time a supervolcano went off, and it was 78,000 years ago or something, and the fact that if it happened again, you likened it to how many times the blast of Hiroshima?
I can't remember the precise number, but it makes the Hiroshima blast look like child's play. Even in kind of recorded history, there have been moments like that. I think it was the Toba volcano in the early 19th century, where a volcano goes off in Indonesia. It might not even be a supervolcano, and that causes famine in Europe that summer because there's so much soot in the atmosphere. And there's a scale of explosivity in terms of volcanoes, the VEI scale, and it's logarithmic, which means that the next one up is kind of 10 times greater than the previous one. And so this would have been, I don't know, VEI 7 or something, maybe lower, and the scale goes up to 9.
How do the experts rank threats generally, not just within volcanoes?
Well, I think it does depend on the experts, and there are very different ways of looking at this stuff. And some experts would focus more on kind of economic disasters. I was looking more at things that really could kill a lot of people at once. And so it depends who you ask for, but lots of the people I spoke to would rank AI and pandemics at the top of that list, just because they could go so badly if they do go badly, perhaps more so than a very bad asteroid would be, because asteroids come at us pretty infrequently, and we already know how to deflect them, at least kind of in principle. But it might be that a pandemic could hit us next year. So that's one of the reasons that it's generally thought to be a kind of graver threat to us.
And I mean, you also point out how, so for instance, if there is a sudden tsunami, a lab that has all these awful pathogens in it, we could get both the tsunami and this horrible disease.
Well, this is something I wrote about in the book. The Strait of Malacca, which is the kind of narrow strip of sea between the Indian Ocean and the Pacific Ocean, has lots of active volcanoes around it, and lots of human activity as well. So one of the worries the researchers that I spoke to was that something like that might happen. There might be an eruption, an earthquake, a tidal wave, something like that, and then this, it cascades into the lab, and then who knows what happens. There have been loads of examples of lab leaks in the past, so we just better hope that that the labs are waterproof.
And if you want to keep the tax burden stable, and I personally think that we need to bring the tax burden down, if we want to allow businesses the headroom to invest, and to grow the private sector in the economy, which is the bit that funds everything else. There are really two things you can do. One of them is improve public sector productivity so that you get more bang for your buck when it comes to the public services that taxes fund. And we should definitely do that, but it does take time, and that's not something that's going to happen overnight. But the thing that you can do, which the Office for Budget Responsibility would recognise in their numbers, is bring the Working Age Welfare Bill down to the level it was before the pandemic. That would save around £47 billion a year, which would mean that taxes would not have to go up. And indeed, Rachel Reeves would have a lot more headroom in terms of her numbers.
Of course, Rachel Reeves did try, not perhaps to do something even that ambitious, they did try to do some welfare reforms, relatively modest ones. They tried to do, even as a kind of symbolic thing, to take away the winter fuel payment. And that caused huge problems, and they just couldn't get it through. So are these things really realistic for her?
Well, I don't know if they're realistic for a Labour Party or not, but they are what the country needs. And I would say this, that they went about those changes in wholly the wrong way. I mean, you are never going to persuade a Labour Party and Labour MPs who see themselves as campaigners for social justice to cut back benefits for poorer people in order to balance the Treasury's books. That is not the right argument. The argument that we need to be making is that it is immoral if someone has anxiety or depression, and now more than half the people who signed off having to look for work are doing so for mental health reasons. It is immoral that we park those people on welfare where less social contact may well mean that their mental illness gets worse, rather than treat that mental illness at a fraction of the cost. And that's what we should be doing. And, you could double the number of people getting treatment for anxiety or depression in the NHS, double it, and it would cost an extra £1 billion out of £47 billion that you would save if you got that welfare bill down to 2019 levels.
Just returning to tax for a moment. So one of the things that we think is almost certainly going to happen is that Rachel Reeves, having refused to do it last time around, is now going to extend the freeze on income tax thresholds through to 2029, 2030. That, of course, is something that you also did as Chancellor. You extended it from the initial policy that Rishi Sunak brought in when he was Chancellor. What's the difference between now and then?
Well, there's a difference in the situation and there's a difference in philosophy. So the difference in the situation was that in 2022, we were coming out of COVID, where we'd spent £350 billion to support businesses and families through the pandemic. And we also were in the middle of an energy crisis caused by the invasion of Ukraine, where we knew that we had to help families who wouldn't be able to pay their energy bill over winter, potentially costing us nearly another £100 billion more. Now, those are the right things to do. We had potentially risked mass unemployment if we hadn't had things like the furlough scheme or the bounce back loans and so on. But they cost money and they have to be funded. But for Rishi Sunak and me, raising tax was a temporary necessity, but the long-term trajectory should always be to bring taxes down to make us more competitive as a country. Compare that to Rachel Reeves, where she doesn't have those immediate factors to fund. And the choice that she's making is not to reform welfare. In fact, I think we're going to see welfare spending going up in this budget because she doesn't want to constrain public spending at all. And because she doesn't have the same belief that I have, that if you look around the world, the fastest growing economies, whether it's in Asia or North America, are ones which tend to tax a lower proportion of GDP.
Do you think, I mean, as you say, there were big reasons as to why it happened, but it was under the Conservatives that taxes did end up going up to historic levels. The tax code became more complicated over time. Higher earners were being hit more. Do you think for the public, they're less convinced now, or the brand has been damaged of the Conservatives as a low tax party? Do you think they can win that back?
Well, it was obviously difficult to win that argument in 2024, only 18 months or just under 2 years after we had to put up taxes. But Geoffrey Howe put up taxes in 1981. George Osborne put up taxes in 2010. Conservatives have to stand for fiscal responsibility. But the difference between Conservatives and Labour is that when we can, we then try and bring the tax burden back down. Geoffrey Howe was followed by Nigel Lawson, who brought taxes down. George Osborne actually significantly reduced the state's share of GDP. And I made a start with the national insurance cuts, the introduction of full expensing for business. Those tax cuts reduced tax as a proportion of GDP by just under 1%, but I wanted to go further as and when we could afford to, and it would have been responsible to do so.
What do you think of Kemi Badenoch's proposal to take away stamp duty?
Well, I think it's one of a number of tax cuts that could help stimulate the economy. I'm very worried that the opposite is going to happen in Rachel Reeves's budget, which is if she introduces higher bands of council tax on more expensive properties. I think that is going to gum up the top end of the property market in the way that the 15% stamp duty currently does. And a thriving property market is one of the things that gets economic activity going. And also, by the way, brings in quite a lot of tax revenue. So, I think, Kemi's absolutely right to look at taxes like stamp duty that are a brake on social mobility. They stop people moving to where the jobs are, as well as a brake on the housing market.
You're starting to get into the sort of territory of growth, which seems like the thing we really need in the economy fundamentally, because it's just sort of flatlining along. Now, Labour, of course, came in saying they were all about growth. They were going to get the growth, and that was going to sort of make the numbers work for them, because they wouldn't. They could use growth to have extra tax revenue, and then they wouldn't need to pare back the spending quite so much. It hasn't happened. They've done some good things, perhaps, on infrastructure, building. They've talked a good game, done a little bit of planning reform and so forth. Why hasn't it worked for them? What have they got wrong?
Because they haven't practiced what they preached. I mean, they talked about growth, but then they raised taxes by £40 billion. They've introduced a rise in employers' national insurance, the new workers' rights bill, which has basically meant that payroll jobs have gone down by 180,000, unemployment has gone up, inflation has gone up. They've done all the things that you shouldn't do if you want to unlock growth in the economy. Now, it's not easy, and one of the biggest reasons why, a Chancellor's job is hard is that all the really good things you can do to unlock growth don't tend to take effect, or don't tend to be reflected in the numbers until 3 or 4 years after you do them. Kind of supply side measures, for example, reforming the planning system. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't do them.